Moving home. This film looks at what happens when someone with a learning disability moves home or is thinking about moving home. James has learning disabilities and dementia. As his capacity to make decisions has diminished, a series of best interests meetings have been held. Two of the practitioners involved describe the vital role played by his sister Mary in those meetings.
What she brought with her was the ability to say, well, if we're thinking about what he might have wanted in this situation, this is how he was when, because she had that fantastic historical knowledge of his life and decisions he'd made in the past and choices he'd made and preferences. And she really understood the bit about still involving him as much as possible. So often she or I or his key worker would meet with him before the meeting. This was when he couldn't participate in the meetings. We're going to have a meeting and these are things we want to talk about. What do you think about? So testing still whether he could have express had an opinion on what we were going to be discussing.
One of the really key bits about having Mary involved was about sort of the equality of everybody who was at the table in terms of giving their view, but it felt like very much a joint decision making as to what was in his best interest.
The residential home where James lived had to close for refurbishment. This presented the group thinking about James's best interests with the difficult task of finding alternative accommodation that met his physical needs.
The decision maker in this situation was somebody representing the funding authority because they were responsible for decisions about where he lived. We needed to make a decision because he couldn't continue living where he was living, and somewhere potentially suitable had been identified. And we needed to make a decision about whether he moved there or whether to a nursing home. And that was a decision that had to be made. One of the places I went to visit with Mary was near where she lived, 150 miles away from where James was living. And I think that helped. It confirmed actually the pros and cons of the two different situations of staying in the locality he was used to, supported by staff and potentially staff and professionals who knew him very well, against moving somewhere where he would be close to his sister, but actually away from other people who meant something to him. Some of those people meant an awful lot to him, and we could tell from his reactions to people they continued to mean a lot to him as well.
How did the best interests process help in this situation?
I think being very clear about what the decision was, what the options were, and giving people the opportunity to say clearly what they thought about those different options, and then for the decision maker to take those into account. Clearly what happens is that often the options are not ideally what everybody wants or some people want, and that will always be the reality of the situation.
Marcella's son Mitchell has always lived at home. When a social worker proposed that he move out, Marcella questioned whether this would really be in his best interests.
We meet every 3 months to discuss what's happening with Mitchell, look at his medication, and the social worker had this brilliant idea that because we were so much at risk at home, that Mitchell should no longer be living with us. Mitchell should be going into supported living. Obviously, I cried for a week, walking down the street crying, because as a parent, you bond with your child. Mitchell is still at school, and this instinct is saying to me, this isn't right. And I've gone back to, is this something my eldest daughter would have wanted? Would she have wanted to live home? Then I spoke to somebody and they said to me, well, all right, Mitchell is 18, but how many 18-year-olds do want to leave home? And it suddenly made me think, well yeah, because my eldest stayed for quite a long age.
The proposed move didn't happen, and Marcella is now supporting Mitchell to think about the options for where he might live in the future.
This is something Mitchell is looking forward to, having his own place. So when it was suggested to me that it would be a really good idea for Mitchell to be in supported housing, I wanted to make sure that it would be a really nice place he would like. There's one thing I was quite adamant was it wouldn't be residential, because I really failed Mitchell if I were to put Mitchell in residential settings, because that's not him. He's lived a life in the community, he knows people know him, and I think we need to move forward with him. I think Mitchell wants to have his own home, but with support. He makes the decision who is going to support him. So that's really what we're aiming to. It's in Mitchell's plan that we register him with the council. We're already working the council in terms of putting quotas around for people with disability. And I'm thinking if Mitchell can be given one of these places, then he has his own support, his personal support. I think that's a better way of living for Mitchell than for Mitchell to be living with people he doesn't know. Great if I've said to him, Mitch, when you have your own home, would you like somebody else living with you? And he said he would. So what I need to do is to look at compatibility, the right people to be with Mitchell, and it'll be his decision, do you want to share with that person or not? So that's the direction we're going.
As family carers, Pete and Wendy Crane recognise the importance of them being able to make best interest decisions about where their son Nicky lives.
In the past, we saw so many occasions when people had a good life and then for no reason, no choice of their own, it was ended. So for example, we saw people who lived under local authority support and then the local authority, for reasons of economics, needed to move people. And so someone who had a great life in a particular house had to be moved to another part of town. We didn't want that to happen to Nicky.
We've always felt that both our children should have the same opportunities. So when Sarah left home and decided to purchase her own house, we thought, well, if Sarah's been able to do that, then we should be able to do that with Nick. He should be able to have a mortgage in his own name. And that's what started the process off.
When we saw this property, we knew it would be great for Nick to live here. But we had to devise and write a support plan. We had to work out how that would be financed. We had to go through all of the normal stuff to do with a mortgage that anybody else would do, you know, finding deposits and dealing with solicitors and the Financial Services Act and dealing with our mortgage broker, who was great through the whole thing. And then on top of that, we also had to deal with everything to do with the Mental Capacity Act.
To buy the house in Nicky's name, Wendy needed to become a deputy for property and affairs.
We viewed the house, we put a deposit down, and then we had to wait 12 months for the Mental Capacity Act stuff to all be sorted out before we could carry on trying to purchase it. So I think with the benefit of hindsight, our feeling is that any parents of someone with the level of intellectual impairment that Nicky's got, we would advise them to try and get the Mental Capacity Act sorted out as soon as possible, really, and then the rest of someone's life becomes relatively straightforward, because in law someone will have the authority to get involved with making financial decisions and sign for financial decisions.
At the moment he is in a transition period where he does still spend time at our house. It was just too big a step for Nick just to move in here all the time. Well, we felt it was at the time, but he settled in so beautifully and is so happy here that the process is now quickening up, and after Christmas he'll probably be here all the time.
Mary and James were happy for their story to be included, but chose not to be filmed, and so actors illustrate their story in these films. If this film has raised issues that you would like to talk about, the Family Carer Support Service will try to help. You can telephone them on 0117 906 1751 or email familycarersupport@hft.org.uk.